So, um, that specific feeling, it usually hits right around maybe 4 near p.m. on a Sunday.
Oh, the Sunday scaries.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe it's right when the alarm goes off on a Monday morning.
I,
And it's not necessarily dread. Dread feels too active a word.
right, it's more subtle than that.
It's not panic. It's just this heavy, muted sense of disconnection. You walk into the office or you log out of Zoom and you see the faces in the gallery view, and there's just this palpable vibe that everyone is sort of, I don't know, holding something back.
Yeah. It's what you might call the Monday morning mask.
The Monday morning mask. Spot on. It really feels like we're all acting out a script that nobody actually believes in anymore. We're saying the lines, let's circle back, touch base, synergy.
Let's take this offline.
Yes. But the energy behind those words is just entirely gone. And it's not just me feeling this, or you. We see it popping up literally everywhere in the culture right now. I mean, a couple of years ago, the headline everywhere was the Great Resignation.
Right. Everybody's just packing up and leaving at once.
Exactly. And then that kind of morphed into quiet quitting.
Which is really just the idea of doing the absolute bare minimum required to keep your paycheck, but emotionally. You're checking out completely. You stay in the seat, but your soul has effectively left the building.
Yeah, exactly. And then, if you flip the script, right, if you look at it from the employer's side, the CEOs, the HR directors, the people actually trying to run these teams, you hear a totally different buzzword. They're all talking about the competence crisis.
Oh, yes, the competence crisis. You hear it in boardrooms constantly. We can't find good people. Nobody wants to work anymore. Or we hire people with great resumes, but they just don't bring any initiative to the table.
It feels like a massive stalemate, doesn't it? Management is essentially screaming, where is the talent? And workers are whispering, why should I even care?
It's a complete breakdown in communication.
It is. But here is the big question we are tackling today, for you, the listener. Are these just temporary HR headaches? Like, is this just a post-pandemic hangover where we're all just a bit tired? Or are we looking at a symptom of a much deeper structural fracture in how our entire economy is built?
That is the crucial question. And to answer it today, we're not just pulling a trendy business book off the bestseller list.
No, we are not.
We aren't looking at a viral blog post or some LinkedIn thought leader's hot take. We are going much deeper. We're doing a deep dive into a primary academic source, specifically a PhD dissertation in the field of organizational sociology.
I really love when we get to do this. We are going straight to the source, completely skipping the middleman. So introduce us to our guide for today.
Absolutely. So our source is a doctoral study authored by Ali Gülüm. This comes from Istanbul University, specifically the Institute of Social Sciences, Department of Sociology. And it is incredibly fresh research. It's dated 2025.
Wow. Okay. So this is cutting edge stuff. This isn't dusty archival history we're digging up.
Very fresh. And I want to make sure the source is front and center here. The title of the work, and I'll use the full English title from the abstract because it really sets the stage perfectly, is Conflict Between Individualist and Collective Dynamics in Modern Economy and the Search for Solutions.
Conflict between individualist and collective dynamics. That is a heavy title, but honestly, it feels like it perfectly captures that exact tension we were just talking about, the me versus the us.
Precisely. And the core focus of Ali Gülüm's doctoral research in organizational sociology is specifically on a concept he calls collective creativity, or in the original Turkish of the thesis, kolektif yaratıcılık.
Okay, let's unpack this right at the top. Because collective creativity, it sounds like a really nice buzzword.
It does.
Like, it sounds like something a consultant slaps onto a PowerPoint slide to justify a massive fee. Hey, team, let's have some collective creativity today. But I get the sense, given that this is a rigorous PhD dissertation, that he means something much more substantial than just a brainstorming session.
He definitely does. And that's really our core mission for this deep dive. We need to explore Gülüm's central argument, which is essentially this. We are currently trying to run a 21st century economy, an economy that requires deep, complex collaboration, using an operating system designed in the 17th century.
Wait, an operating system?
Yes, a social and philosophical operating system based entirely on the isolated rational individual. We've built a world that worships the I, but we are trying to work in an economy that absolutely demands the we.
And the friction between those two things, this outdated I operating system trying to run modern we software, that's what is causing that Monday morning disconnection you feel.
Exactly. That friction is literally the sound of the societal gears grinding.
Okay, so if we are running on outdated software, We really need to look at the source code. We need to understand where this individual operating system actually came from. And from what I gathered looking at the research, Gülüm takes us way back. We're not starting with Steve Jobs or Henry Ford here. We're starting with
Philosophers.
philosophers.
We are going all the way back to the Enlightenment. Because to understand why your performance review feels so incredibly frustrating today, or why you feel completely alone in your career path, you actually have to understand thinkers like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Mill, and Kant.
Man, I haven't thought about some of those names since my college Western Civ classes. It just seems wild to think that John Locke, writing in the 1600s, is the underlying reason I hate filling out my timesheet on Friday afternoons.
It sounds super abstract, I know, but it's remarkably direct. Gülüm argues that these thinkers laid the actual philosophical foundation for the individualist ideal. You have to remember, before this period, if you think about feudal Europe, your identity was largely defined by your community.
Right. You were a part of a whole. You were a serf or a lord or a member of a specific guild.
Exactly.
You knew your place, and you basically stayed in it your whole life.
You really didn't have an identity separate from your group. But the Enlightenment introduced this radical, completely world-changing new idea, the rational individual. The belief that the basic fundamental unit of society is not the group or the village, but the autonomous person who acts in their own self-interest.
Which, to be fair, sounds pretty great. I mean, that's freedom. That's the whole I am the master of my fate concept.
Oh, it was incredibly liberating. We really can't downplay that. Gülüm notes heavily in the text that this shift freed people from oppressive feudal bonds. It allowed for the concept of human rights to even exist, the idea of choosing your own career, of owning your own property. It was the birth of the modern world as we know it. It broke the chains of what people used to just call destiny.
But I hear a massive but coming here.
There is always a but in sociology. Gülüm points out a severe double-edged sword here. He notes that while modernization liberated the individual, it also completely isolated them. It removed the inherent safety net of the community. You became free, yes, but you also became totally alone against the market.
So it's just you out there, sink or swim, you against the world.
And that directly leads us to the economic promise, the new social contract of the industrial age. The system essentially said to the worker, if you are a rational, hardworking individual and you rigorously pursue your self-interest, you will succeed.
That's the American dream, basically, or just the modern capitalist dream anywhere. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yes, and this logic was baked deeply into the early industrial economy. Think about Taylorism.
Right, Frederick Taylor, scientific management.
Exactly, the early 1900s, stopwatches, assembly lines, measuring the exact micro-movements of a worker's arm.
Yeah, trying to shave off 2 seconds from a task.
Now picture that assembly line. How did they treat the human worker in that system?
Like a machine part. Literally like a cog.
A completely replaceable part, an isolated atom. The thesis uses this specific term, atomized. The factory didn't need you to collaborate with the guy standing next to you. In fact, if you talked to him, you were slowing down the line. You were a problem. They needed you to stand at your station and do your one specific task faster than anyone else. You were just an individual unit of production.
And that worked for a while. I mean, we basically built the entire 20th century on that model. Mass production exploded. Standard of living went up.
It worked because the work itself was mechanical. You didn't need to like your neighbor or deeply trust your neighbor to tighten a bolt on a Model T Ford. You just needed to be efficient. But here is where it gets really interesting for us today, and where Gülüm's thesis identifies what he calls the great contradiction.
Because the economy changed. We aren't mostly building Model Ts on assembly lines anymore.
Fundamentally changed. We shifted from mechanical work to knowledge work. We moved from an economy based on hands to an economy based on minds.
And knowledge work is just inherently different. You can't just blindly follow a manual to write code or design a marketing campaign.
No, you can't. In the modern economy, value is created through innovation, through complex problem solving, and through synergy. It requires that term we brought up earlier, collective creativity.
So let's really define that for the listener.
Yeah.
How is collective creativity actually different from just, working together on a project or having a weekly staff meeting?
Collective creativity is when a group of people comes together to solve a problem that no single person in that group could have possibly solved alone. It's that magic moment in a writer's room or a software engineering lab where idea A crashes into idea B and creates idea C, and at the end of the day, nobody even knows who came up with it. It's true synergy.
So the actual nature of the work today requires us to be a collective. We literally have to be a hive mind to get anything meaningful done in such a complex world.
But, and this is the massive structural friction point the dissertation highlights, the structure of the economy is still stubbornly built for the individual. Think about how a typical modern corporation is run right now. How are you evaluated at the end of the year?
Individual performance review. My boss sits down and says, "How did you do this quarter?"
Right. And how are you paid?
Individual salary, individual bonus, based on my personal metrics.
Exactly. And what does your career path look like?
Well, it's my personal climb up the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And honestly, if I want a promotion, I often have to actively beat out my colleague who's sitting right next to me.
Precisely. We have a system that demands we act like a collective to actually get the work done. Management is always saying collaborate, share ideas, be a team player. But that same system creates an environment where we are constantly competing against each other as atomized individuals for survival and financial reward.
That is a massive disconnect. It's almost crazy making. It's like a football coach telling the team, hey, you have to win together, play as a unit, but then saying, oh, by the way, I'm only going to pay the one player who touches the ball the most.
That is a perfect analogy. And what happens in that scenario? Eventually, the players just stop passing the ball. They start hogging it. Or worse, they just stop trying altogether because the game feels totally rigged.
And this leads us directly to that competence crisis Gülüm talks about. I found this specific part of the deep dive fascinating because it completely flips the script on what we normally hear. Usually, when CEOs complain about a skills gap, we think, oh, people just don't know how to code, or they don't know how to use the latest AI tools.
Right. It's framed as a technical mismatch. We desperately need Python developers, and the market only has Java developers.
But Gülüm says it's way deeper than just missing tech skills.
Much deeper. He argues it is actually a withdrawal of will.
Withdrawal of will. It sounds almost philosophical. It's very heavy.
It is philosophical, but it's very real. It's a psychological reaction to the massive gap between the story we were told and the reality we actually experience every day. We were all sold the story of meritocracy. Be a self-entrepreneur, hustle hard, be a strong individual, and you will definitely be rewarded. But the reality for so many people today is deep insecurity and disposability.
So in this light, quiet quitting isn't just laziness. It's not that people are suddenly somehow worse at working than they were 20 years ago.
No, not at all. In the sociological analysis, quiet quitting is actually a completely rational response to a broken deal. If the system constantly treats you as an individual transaction, an atom that can be swapped out, you naturally start acting like one. You give exactly what you were paid for to the letter of your contract, and not a single ounce of your soul more.
That makes so much sense when you frame it that way. Why would I ever invest my collective creativity, which, let's be honest, is a very vulnerable, high-effort thing to give to someone, if I know I'm just a disposable line item on some executive spreadsheet?
You wouldn't. Nobody would. Creativity inherently requires safety. And if you feel like a disposable machine part, you are, by definition, not safe.
And this brings us perfectly into the third section of our analysis today, the erosion of trust. As a footnote to his main argument, Gülüm doesn't just look at the internal office dynamics. He zooms way out to the macroeconomic history of shocks that brought us to this exact moment. He refers to it as the polycrisis.
The polycrisis. It almost sounds like a monster in a sci-fi movie, but it's actually just our lived economic history.
The dissertation walks through a pretty stark timeline of these crises, right?
It does. It essentially traces a lineage of societal and economic trauma, starting with the Great Depression in 1929, then moving to the stagflation of the 1970s, hitting the 2008 financial crisis, and finally culminating in the COVID-19 pandemic.
And the argument he's making isn't just, hey, bad things happened in the past. It's that each of these major events fundamentally changed the rules of the game for the worker.
Specifically, they changed who...
Okay, let's really unpack this for the listener. How did the risks shift?
Well, think about the post-war era, the 1950s and 60s. During that time, there was a relatively strong welfare state, very strong labor unions, and a general cultural sense of corporate loyalty. The system, meaning the government and large corporations, absorbed a massive amount of the risk. You generally had a job for life if you wanted it.
Right, the classic image of working at IBM or Ford for 40 years and getting a gold watch at retirement.
Exactly. But starting in the 1970s, with stagflation and the aggressive rise of neoliberal economics, the system began to systematically offload that risk directly onto the individual worker. We started hearing terms crop up like labor market flexibility.
Oh man, flexibility.
Yeah.
That is one of those classic corporate euphemisms that sounds so nice on the surface, like you're doing yoga or something, but usually means something completely different when it's buried in an employment contract.
Exactly. For the company, flexibility means pure efficiency. It means being able to hire and fire incredibly quickly based on quarterly market needs. But for the worker, as Gülüm argues, flexibility almost always translates directly to insecurity. It means the steady decline of long-term employment. It means the explosive rise of the gig economy. It essentially means you are entirely on your own.
And the 2008 financial crisis must have been just a huge accelerant for this feeling of isolation.
Huge. For an entire generation, especially millennials, that was the exact moment the mask slipped. You did everything society told you was right. You went to college, you took on the crushing student debt because it was an investment in yourself, and then the floor just completely fell out from under the economy. It deeply reinforced the reality of the disposable worker.
So the thesis essentially argues that deep trust, which, as we established, is absolutely essential for that collective creativity to happen, has been totally replaced by these anxious short-term transactions.
Yes. Because it's practically impossible to be truly creative when your nervous system is in survival mode. If you are constantly worried about making rent, or if you suspect you'll be laid off next quarter just so the company can boost its stock price by 2 cents, you aren't going to take creative risks. You aren't going to innovate. You are going to hide and protect yourself.
And this leads to what the expert in the thesis powerfully calls an ontological crisis.
Yes, ontological. It's a big academic word, but it just relates to the very nature of being or human existence.
So he's saying it's not just a financial crisis anymore, it's a full-blown existential one.
Right. It's no longer just about the money. It's fundamentally about meaning. Why on earth would an individual commit their soul, their deepest passion, their absolute best ideas to an organization that has made it abundantly clear they view them merely as a temporary expendable resource?
They wouldn't. They would build walls, they would withdraw their will, just like we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And that exact withdrawal is what confused companies are currently feeling and labeling as the competence crisis. They are desperately trying to extract high-level collective creativity from people they have systematically, over decades, made to feel entirely unsafe.
So we have this severely broken structure. But, companies aren't completely blind. Executives know something is wrong. They feel the total lack of energy in the physical office. That's why we have all these mandatory team-building retreats and expensive culture initiatives now, right?
But here's exactly where we fall into what Gülüm brilliantly terms the sociological trap. And to really grasp this, we have to talk about a foundational sociologist named Ferdinand Tönnies.
Tönnies. I vaguely remember that name from my university days. Is this the whole Gemeinschaft versus Gesellschaft concept?
That's the one. Now, these are German terms, but listener, don't let that scare you off. They're absolutely central to understanding why your mandatory company picnic feels so incredibly awkward and forced.
Okay, let's break it down for everyone. Start with Gemeinschaft.
Gemeinschaft translates roughly to community. Think of a traditional village, a close family unit, or a tight-knit religious group. It is organic, it is entirely natural, it is based on deep, unspoken trust and a shared life. You don't sign a legal contract to help your brother move a couch. You do it because you are part of the exact same organic whole.
Got it. Organic, natural connection, the true we.
And Gesellschaft.
That translates to society. Yeah.
Yes, but specifically in the sense of civil society or a modern corporation, it is artificial, it is highly mechanical, it is based entirely on formal contracts and individual self-interest. You interact with the cashier at the grocery store not because you deeply love them, but because you have a specific, defined financial transaction to complete with them.
Okay, so a family dinner is Gemeinschaft, but a massive multinational company is Gesellschaft.
Correct. Now here's the trap Gülüm identifies. Modern companies are absolutely desperate for the immense benefits of Gemeinschaft. They want the fierce loyalty, the deep trust, the late-night passion, and that we're all in this together vibe of a real community.
Cue the classic CEO speech. We are a family here at Global Corp.
Exactly, but they are trying to awkwardly paste that community feeling inside a rigid Gesellschaft structure. A structure based entirely on legally binding contracts, strict hierarchy, and maximizing shareholder profit.
So they try to manufacture community on top of a corporation.
And it feels incredibly fake to the workers because it is fake. Gülüm argues forcefully that you simply cannot force Gemeinschaft inside a transactional structure. Tönnies himself noted way back when that society is an artificial product. So when a middle manager tries to artificially manufacture community through a forced trust fall exercise on a Friday, but then HR lays off 10% of the staff the following Tuesday to make quarterly projections, the illusion completely shatters.
That's a sociological illusion.
Yeah.
That is such a powerful phrase. We are all pretending to be a cozy village, but everyone knows we are actually standing in a cutthroat marketplace.
And when that fragile illusion breaks, you get what another famous sociologist, Emil Durkheim, called anomie.
Anomie. That translates to normlessness, right? A breakdown of rules.
Yes. It's a profound sense of being lost or alienated. When the social glue holding a group together dissolves, people feel completely unmoored. They literally don't know what the social rules are anymore. They ask themselves, wait, are we a family like they said? Or am I just an expendable employee? That constant ambiguity creates massive anxiety. And in a state of anomie, you absolutely cannot achieve high-level collaboration. You just have a bunch of scared people looking out for themselves.
Okay, so let's pause here and just look at the landscape we've painted. It is honestly pretty bleak. We are lonely, atomized individuals trapped in a highly transactional system that constantly demands we act like a loving family, but treats us like disposable machine parts the second things get tough.
It is a very stark diagnosis of the modern workplace. But that is exactly why this dissertation is so vital. It doesn't just throw its hands up and stop at everything is broken. Remember the full title we mentioned at the start. It includes whole Howlett and the search for solutions.
Right. We desperately need a way out of this trap. So what is the actual fix here?
Yeah.
How do we realistically get to this collective creativity without just faking it with ping pong tables in the break room?
First, we have to define what we're aiming for properly. We touched on it earlier, but Gülüm heavily references research by scholars Hargadon and Bechki. They define collective creativity not merely as people working together, but as a highly specific state where the group intelligence vastly exceeds the sum of the individual parts.
It's that 1 + 1 = 3 moment we mentioned.
Exactly. But to actually foster that environment, we need a radically different kind of management. We have to finally upgrade that 17th century operating system. And this brings us to one of the real heroes of Gülüm's thesis, Mary Parker Follett.
I have to admit, I don't know her work at all. Who was she?
She was a brilliant management consultant and philosopher operating in the early 20th century. She was actually contemporaneous with Frederick Taylor, the stopwatch guy, but her thinking was light years ahead of her time. While Taylor was obsessively measuring arm movements, Follett was deeply analyzing human dynamics and complex relationships. Gülüm uses her foundational concepts to distinguish between two totally different types of power in an organization.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, there is power over.
Power over. That sounds exactly like traditional top-down management. I am the boss, I have the title, so you do what I say. Basic coercion and control.
Right. I have the power, you do not. This is the pure Taylorist model. And to be fair, it works perfectly fine for moving heavy boxes from point A to point B, but it absolutely kills creativity.
And the alternative she proposed.
Power with.
Power with. I like the sound of that.
It's a concept of coactive power. It represents a genuine integration of interests. It's very important to note it's not just about compromise where we both begrudgingly give up something just to get along. It's about true integration, where we combine our distinct perspectives and power to create something entirely new that neither of us could have done alone. The thesis strongly argues we must move to power with leadership to unlock collective creativity.
That sounds beautiful in theory, but practically speaking, what does power with actually look like on a random Tuesday in a modern office? Does it mean we abolish bosses and all hold hands and sing?
No, not at all. It's actually much more rigorous and demanding than traditional management. It requires a massive psychological shift in leadership focus. Gülüm specifically describes this as a necessary shift from a mindset of control to a mindset of sense-making.
Let's break that down. Control versus sense-making.
Well, the traditional manager is completely obsessed with control. They monitor performance constantly, track hours logged, demand endless documentation, and stare at KPIs all day. The thesis specifically highlights the deep conflict we see today between so-called agile methodologies and bureaucratic documentation.
Oh man, I have seen this exact thing play out. We tell the team, hey, we're agile now, which is supposed to mean being fast, responsive, and flexible. But then we force the developers to spend half their week filling out tedious Jira tickets and forms just to mathematically prove they are working.
Exactly. That is the old control mindset actively trying to suffocate the new creative mindset. Gülüm argues that real, valuable creativity happens in the improvisation, not in following the manual. If you painstakingly map out every single step of a process in advance, you leave absolutely no room for the magic to happen.
So what does a sense-making leader do differently?
Their primary job isn't to control the microprocess, but to make sense of the surrounding chaos for their team. Their job is to build a foundation of deep trust so that the team actually feels safe enough to improvise. They set the broader context. A sense-making leader says, here is the complex problem we're facing, here is our ultimate goal, now I trust you all to figure out the best way to get there.
It's about intentionally creating the right conditions for the work to happen organically, rather than dictatorially dictating every keystroke of the work.
Yes. Psychological safety is the absolute key here. If I'm terrified of being punished or looking stupid for suggesting a bad idea, I will simply never offer a good one. I'll just keep my head down.
And as we get into section 6, the dissertation actually provides some really concrete, real-world examples of this, right? It's not just sitting in the realm of theory.
It absolutely does. It cites a really fascinating case study regarding Volkswagen.
Volkswagen, the massive German car company. That doesn't sound very agile.
Right, but the point made in the research is highly instructive. It shows that management often gets tunnel vision, looking only at KPIs, key performance indicators, and mechanical processes. They mistakenly think if they just ruthlessly optimize the assembly process, the car automatically gets built better. But the sociological research shows that leaders must attend to the ideas and beliefs of the workers, the actual meaning of the work.
The meaning, going back to that ontological crisis.
Exactly. If the workers on the floor don't genuinely believe in what they are doing, or if they don't believe their individual voice actually matters to management, the collaboration completely fails. You simply cannot KPI your way to innovation. If the corporate culture is fundamentally feel-based, which, frankly, Volkswagen has very publicly struggled with historically, people will actively hide small problems to protect themselves rather than working collectively to solve them before they become massive scandals.
And there was a Pixar example in there too, right? Pixar always seems to be the gold standard when people talk about this stuff.
Yes, the thesis explicitly references Pixar's highly successful model of peer culture.
What does that entail practically?
It's about radically empowering creative workers. But most importantly, it's about completely liberating communication across the organization. At Pixar, anyone is allowed to talk to anyone else. You don't have to formally request permission from your direct boss to go talk to someone else's boss in a different department.
That immediately breaks down the rigid corporate hierarchy.
It does. And they also utilize this brilliant concept of the postmortem.
Now, in most companies I know, the postmortem is that dreadful meeting at the end of a failed project where everyone sits around a table trying to figure out who to legally blame for going over budget.
Right. It's basically a blame-storming session. But in Pixar's model, as highlighted by Gülüm, the postmortem is strictly designed for collective learning. It is explicitly not a blame game. It is a genuine collective inquiry into the question, how can we systematically be better next time?
That is a perfect example of power with.
It truly is. It transforms perceived failure into incredibly valuable data, rather than a reason for individual punishment. When you completely remove the looming threat of punishment from the room, people finally open up. They share what really happened on the ground. And that space of vulnerability is where the actual collective learning happens.
That requires just an immense amount of trust from everyone involved.
It does. And Gülüm suggests that the ultimate solution isn't just HR drawing up slightly different organizational charts. It is about actively allowing what he calls communities of practice to form and thrive.
Communities of practice, let's define that.
These are informal, organic groups that form naturally within a company around shared expertise and genuine passion for a subject. They very often completely ignore the official company hierarchy. It's the junior engineers talking late into the night with the senior designers simply because they desperately want to solve a tough problem, not because some manager rigidly scheduled a mandatory cross-departmental sync.
It's almost like letting a little bit of that Gemeinschaft, that wild, organic community feeling, grow naturally inside the cracks of the rigid corporate Gesellschaft.
Exactly. You absolutely cannot mandate it. A CEO can't send a memo saying, you will now form an organic community by 3 p.m. Friday. But leadership can choose to nurture it. They can actively stop killing it with suffocating bureaucracy. They can intentionally create safe, unstructured spaces for it to happen.
Yeah, this is really deeply coming together for me. That Monday morning feeling we started with, it isn't just about being a little tired from the weekend. It is a profound structural conflict we are feeling in our bones.
Let's try to summarize the massive journey we've been on today because it really is a huge arc Gülüm has mapped out. We started by identifying that widespread feeling of disconnection.
Right. And we trace that feeling all the way back to a 300-year-old philosophical operating system, the Enlightenment's invention of the rational individual.
We then realized that we are essentially individualist by historical design. That's the deeply ingrained software running in our heads. But the reality of the modern knowledge economy demands we act as true collectivists in practice.
We saw how the polycrisis, rolling from the Great Depression all the way through the trauma of COVID, has systematically eroded the basic trust necessary for that collectivism, which directly led us to the competence crisis and the sad reality of the disposable worker.
And finally, we learned that the actual fix for this mess isn't implementing more rigid control mechanisms or forcing fake family vibes on employees, but instead embracing genuine power with leadership and fiercely protecting spaces for collective creativity.
That is a really solid summary. Ali Gülüm's central thesis is just incredibly clear. We cannot simply fix the modern economy by skilling up isolated individuals. We don't just need more people who know how to code. We desperately need to repair the broken social contract itself.
We have to stop treating human beings like isolated atoms and finally start treating them like genuine partners.
So for the listener tuning in to this deep dive right now, what does all this theory actually mean for them tomorrow morning when that alarm goes off?
If you are in a leadership position, I really want you to ask yourself a very hard, uncomfortable question. Are you actively demanding collective creativity from your team, but stubbornly managing them with individual control? Are you constantly preaching synergy, but financially rewarding selfishness?
That is a really tough look in the mirror for any manager.
It is, but you have to critically look at your incentive structures. Do your actual rewards match your lofty rhetoric?
And what if you are a worker? What if you're the person listening right now who feels that heavy disconnection we talked about at the very beginning?
Know that your feeling is completely valid. You aren't crazy. You aren't just lazy. You are having a completely rational reaction to a massive historical contradiction. You are a brilliant 21st century mind trapped inside a corporate structure that still treats you like a 19th century factory hand.
That is incredibly validating to hear. It finally puts a real name to the ghost in the machine that so many of us feel.
I want to leave the listener with one final, very provocative concept straight from the conclusion of the dissertation. It's the idea of meaning partnership, or as Gülüm terms it in the original Turkish of his research, anlam ortaklığı.
Meaning partnership. Anlam ortaklığı.
The future of work simply isn't about finding the next superstar individual. The myth of the lone genius changing the world is exactly that, a myth of the past. The future belongs entirely to the resilient collective. But, and this is the crucial part, that collective can only exist if there is a true partnership in meaning. We have to share not just the financial profits, but the underlying purpose of the work. We have to build modern organizations based on genuine, unshakable trust, not just transactional legal contracts.
Anlam ortaklığı. I really like that. Honestly, it sounds like a place I would actually want to work. It sounds like an environment where walking in on a Monday morning wouldn't feel so bad at all.
It is truly the only sustainable way forward. As Gülüm eloquently writes in his conclusion, we have to find a way to navigate our modern economic crises without permanently sacrificing our fundamental human capacities. We simply have to stop breaking the people just to feed the machine.
What a profound place to end. A huge, huge thank you to the brilliant work of Ali Gülüm and his 2025 dissertation. Again, for those who want to track it down, it's titled Conflict Between Individualist and Collective Dynamics in Modern Economy and the Search for Solutions. It has given us a massive amount to think about today.
It certainly has. I see it as a much-needed roadmap for a better, more human way to work.
And thank you, the listener, for joining us in this deep dive. Take these ideas into your office this week. Go out there and find your meaning partnership. We will see you next time.